Alright, welcome to the last video of this course. I know it's a long course, but hopefully you're getting a lot out of it. So we're gonna talk about these because these actually are useful, unlike a lot of this hard ups bullshit. You got all these menus here. Obviously this one is, non-destructive or destructive. So if you want cutters to be applied, you want to go destructive. If you don't, non-destructive. I would suggest you work non-destructively because reasons. And this one is just a small deploy, right? So, and if you hold shift, it's gonna, clean all the boolean, the loose boolean, right? So similar situation to what you have with manage. So if I'm going to go here and nuke the boolean, I still have this rogue boolean running here in my scene, right? If I go to settings and alt click on manage, it's going to simply remove this boolean. Same thing, okay? So that's that. Now let's go to behavior and let's talk about it. Obviously here you got modifier sorting, you can turn it on and off. And these, remember we were running this screw modifier, right? And remember we were running the modifier based circle cut, this one. And the modifier was retained, right? Screw modifier, that's what is it for, okay? I never touch this, right? Not even once. I maybe sometimes, might be playing with these, like enable solidify for sorting, etc. But honestly, this is set the way it is for a reason. So if you really don't have any specific need for changing it, don't touch it, okay? Now, these are interesting. So for example, active only, you see, cut only the active object and align to select it. So if you have two objects, right? And one of them, the one you're going to select first is sort of rotated or transformed, and you shift select this one, you're going to be cutting the active object, right? But you're going to be cutting it in the alignment of the object you selected first. So if I run a cutter right now, right, like this, boom, that's going to happen. Do you see what I mean? So I'm going to be able to align to my selected object, the first one, but the active one's going to be the one's going to get cut. If I turn it off, obviously both of them gonna get cut. That's what it's for, okay? Next one's gonna be auto ortho. That is something I wouldn't touch. Shift V, if you go here and you go to view, you can also select auto ortho, right? So if I do this, let me just, nuke all this. If I'm gonna go to orthographic view, it's going to automatically align my cutters. Now, the reason why I don't touch this is because I prefer to cut in object view and view align in auto, which means when I'm gonna go to orthographic view, it's going to automatically align the cutters in orthographic view to my view. Do you see what I mean? So when I'm gonna switch to object, it's aligned to object. It's easier to work this way and much faster, so I wouldn't touch this one, okay? Apply slices, obviously, it's gonna apply to slice boolean. So if you're gonna have a slice boolean like this, right? So X is going to apply this boolean here. This is going to get applied. And this one's going to be live. That's what's going to happen. This could be useful when you're running a lot of slice booleans and you want them to, become separate objects, okay? Next one, this one, show wire. This is going to basically show the wire of an object when you're cutting it. So let's just add a subdivision here, right? And when I'm going to be cutting, it's going to show the wire. And when you finish cutting, it will stop showing the wire. This could be very useful for when you are, for example, working on a mesh that's very dense. Or let's say has a, specific, bevel running in here, right? And you don't really want to encroach on this bevel like this. And you want to make sure when you're cutting, you're not cutting on the bevels. You're not cutting here, right? Do you see what I mean? So that could be very, very useful. Apply scale, you want to keep it on. Basically, when you're going to scale something in object mode, right, the scale is going to get distorted. So if you go here to item, you will see the scale is distorted. When you're going to be running a cut, automatically that scale is going to get applied. You want to keep that on because it's very useful for running bevels, solidifications, anything really on that mesh, erase, etc. Okay. Next one, show shape. This is going to basically show the shape after cutting. So when you finish cutting, it's going to display the shape. I don't think that's a good way of working because, you can always hold shift, right? Which is very easy to access. It's so close to your left-hand side of the keyboard. So hold shift and you got your shape. And if you don't really need it, you just, can keep cutting. So if you want to perform multiple cuts, you don't want your scene to be convoluted and complicated. You want the cutters to be removed from the scene. You want to see just the shape, right? But when you need to see the cutter or you want to manipulate with it, you can always hold shift and, play with it. I think that's the best way of working. But you see, like, we 7 options down, and each of them is actually useful. That's why I said Boxcutter has a way better structure in terms of engineering, or in terms of the core sort of thought behind how these tools were designed, which is why I really like how Proxy designed this. I mean, it's just brilliant. Anyway, let's continue. This one, hide gray shape. I think we already discussed this. When you are drawing something in draw mode, it's going to hide this gray shape. So when I turn it off, right, you will see that it's gonna show the mesh, sort of a matcap, and if you turn it on, it won't. Okay, so there you go. Auto smooth, you want it. You want your modifiers to add auto smooth. Otherwise, you need to add it to every single mesh. But when you are working with, let's say sub D, maybe you don't want it, so you want to turn it off. And then when you're gonna cut something, right, auto smooth will not be added. This could be very helpful when you're cutting a mesh that you are about to subdivide. So this is another, very useful options. Parent shape, obviously this is gonna parent cutters to your mesh. You wanna keep it on. Clamp inset, this is interesting. So if you're going to turn it on and you wanna run an inset boolean, this one, and you're gonna press T, if you're gonna go too far, it's gonna clamp it. So you can't really go past a certain amount of the T solidification. Next one is cutter UV. It's gonna add UV to cutters. So if you are interested in creating game assets, this could be useful. Then persistent taper. This is I mean, if you turn it on and you run a taper with Shift T, it's not T, Shift T, right, like this, and click, then every single one after this is gonna have a persistent taper until you turn it off. I don't think this is a good idea to run it from here. I think I would prefer to run it from here to enable shift operations and set it to taper. So when you're gonna be running a boolean, then you can hold shift and let me just hang on a second. Persistent taper disabled. Let me just disable this cube. Okay. If you're gonna hold shift now, you see you can enter taper operations, right? So this I think is better because it's not persistent, but you can always enter the taper by holding shift. That's a very useful feature. So I would actually enable it in here, instead of running a permanent taper. But if you are running a lot of tapered cuts, maybe that's better. This one's gonna be auto hide, so it's gonna basically hide previously made unselected cutters. So if you're going to start cutting again, it's gonna hide the previous cutter even if it was shifted to live. So if I'm going to shift this to live and start cutting the mesh, the previous one's gonna get hidden. If you turn it off, it won't be. So again, look at this, 99% of these options are very useful. Like I said, Boxcutter design is extremely good. This one, I'm not really sure how this really works. But this has to do with the extraction boolean for the when you create a custom boolean, right? But this switches to classic behavior, and I think this is one of these options you shouldn't touch. So when you have a boolean, running in here, you want to extract it, you're gonna press Y to extract it, and I think this changes the behavior. But honestly, I'm not sure how this exactly works, and if it's anything to do with classic behavior, I would just simply keep it checked on, because if this is a new behavior, it's probably improved, so I wouldn't really worry about it. IQ cut, this is going to allow you to simply align cutters better in view align when you're using laser cut. And I don't really use view align, right? I'm just telling you that object align is much better. This is a very, very niche sort of a setting. And honestly, I never use these three, ever, like ever. I just set it to object, align in ortho, done. I don't even, the only time I go to this menu, right, is to change these, that's all. I really don't need this. I never really change to any of these, ever. This one, jump to exact, is going to allow you to use join boolean without this offset. Okay, let's try it again. Let me just turn the graphics on. So let's go to this one, turn it off. Why I want to see the shape of the boolean. There we go. Anyway, going back here to this menu, jump to exact. So if you turn it on, if you're going to be running a joint boolean with J, it should be jumping to exact boolean and sort of removing this excess shape, but for some reason it's not doing it. Let me see that. Let me just nuke this and run it again. So cube, and then right? Join and apply, and let me see this. It's set to exact, but the offset is still present, which means maybe it's bugged because you see we still have this offset. So the offset should be removed, which is interesting. So let me just turn it off and see something here. Let me remove this. Let me run another card. And let's run this with exact. So let's run a join boolean here like this and switch it to exact. So Alt E, right? And then you see now it's flash. So I think this is bugged, okay? Because what this should do is should be jumping to exact boolean and removing this offset so it's flush with the surface, right? Because normally when you cut a surface like this, you see that the cutter is slightly offset, and this will basically remove the offset. So maybe this is something they need to work on. This one is interesting. It's gonna be in edit mode. You're gonna be using an active edge for orienting cutters. So let's say you are in, you're in edit mode and you got the edge selected, right? If you're gonna run a cutter, it's gonna orient it to a selected edge, which is really cool because normally if you don't have it selected, let me just go to Shift V and not nearest edge but local, it's going to align to local view, same in edit mode, right? It's going to align to a local view, but if you have an edge selected, it's going to align to this edge. So this option being turned on is actually really, really useful, okay? And then you can change, the orient method. You can change the Boolean solver to be fast or exact. I suggest you keep it on fast because exact, it's not really needed in 99% of cases and it's going to slow down your viewport. And going back to this setting here, the orient method is set to local, which is a preferred method because when you have mesh, rotated, you want it to be set to a local orientation, so it follows the the rotation of the object. And if you have something very custom you need to align to, you can either use the edge, right, or you can go in the object view to Shift V menu and align in here. So you have a lot of options, right? So again, this first menu behavior, extremely useful. Collections, we already talked about is, the same as in here, so there's no point of talking about that. Next one's gonna be shape. This is all about cutters, okay? So you got laser cut depth. Again, you can set it in here. We talked about it. Then you have auto depth for the laser cut, auto proportions for the cutters. Then you have amount of verts in a circle. So when you're going to be running basic circle cut, you're going to have 33 verts by default. You can change that. I think 33 is maybe too much if you're going to be running regular cuts. I think, you're going to be fine probably with like, I don't know, 18 or 24. So you might want to change this to something, less crazy, right? Then inset thickness, by default. Then you got rotation here, R by default is gonna be on the Z-axis, right? So if you want to change it to something different, you can. Inset thickness for the inset boolean and default array count for the cutters. So if you're gonna run a cutter, press V, by default it's gonna be 13. I think it's excessive, probably should be like, I don't know, 3 or something, okay? Then you get array axis by default. You can change it if you want to, but you can press X to change it as well. Solidification thickness, that's a default value. So when you solidify cutter, right, press T. The default initial solidification, that's the value for it. Bevel on a cutter, number of segments. I think 6 is fine because when you put 3, it's going to be a little bit too narrow. You remember that cutters usually are a little bit more, the bevel is a bit more thick and round. And if you're going to have 3 bevels over there, 3 segments, it's going to be a bit too faceted. You want a bit more resolution, so this is perfect setting. Then you got quad bevel width and setting for bevel count. Should be the same as here. There should be, if you change this one, you need to change this one as well. Otherwise, you're gonna have 2 different bevels, so B and then Q, right? You want these bevels to be equal in terms of, number of segments. Then you got taper sizing and whether it's persistent or not. Keep taper lattice. Remember, like we talked about tapers, right? So when you run a taper cut, so not this one, taper cut, there we go, Shift T, right? And you apply it. If you click on a cutter and go to modifiers, there should be a lattice running on it, but if it's not, it means it's removed. So if you wanted to have it kept on the cutter live lattice, you want to turn it on. So then when you're going to run a Shift T and shift click to live, you're going to have a taper and you can, adjust it here if you want to. So there you go, that's how it works. And so let me just turn it off because I don't want that. Where was it? This one, right? cycle all cutters. So when you cycle through cutters, you cycle through all of them. And then the recall dimensions. So when you recall cutter from the recall collection, remember this one, right? The recall collection, right? You can preserve the size of cutters or the dimensions, right? So recall dimensions, if you take it on. Then we have this auto flip draw, but I've never used it before. I have no idea what it does, to be honest. So you're gonna have to look up documentation. But you know, I don't think it's very important. Probably some very, very niche scenario. These three, if you hover over, you'll see what it does. You know, it's for cutters basically. When you start drawing the cutter, you know, the draw option, right? I mean, the draw action. Some of these options, like I said in hard ups and here too, they shouldn't be fiddled with. Do not touch these because when you start fiddling with them, you know, you're gonna cause problems. I would not touch any of these, all right? This one's gonna enable the shift operation behavior, right? Which is exactly the same as in here. Where was it? This one, right? It's the same thing. So, you know, you can enable it over there. You don't have to go here. Then you have release lock. We talked about this laser cut, repeat lock, repeat click, you know, all that. So here, this one, right? So if you hold shift and click, these options, right? We talked about them in the top bar menu for Boxcutter. So, you know, go ahead and rewatch this if you don't remember. I'm not gonna be, you know, repeating that. The same with quick execute. For cutters, we, you know, shift to active. We discussed all that. Now, shift to active, basically you hold shift key and you shift boolean to active. Like I said, this is very useful because when you wanna work on a cutter, you hold shift and it's gonna, you know, shift to active. When you're gonna draw another cutter, this one's gonna disappear. This is the correct behavior, and from practical standpoint, I think it's the best one to keep, so, you know, don't touch it. This one enables or disables toolbar for the Boxcutter. You know, why would you want to disable it? I don't know. I want to have access to options. Now this one here allows selection, right? This one, you want to keep it off, okay? If you turn it on, you're not going to be able to draw. You see, you're going to be only able to select stuff. So I don't know why would you want that on. You want to be able to cut stuff with Boxcutter and then select things. So, you know, I don't even know why it's there. This one we already discussed, right? It's going to allow you to basically cancel end gun with one click. So when you have a complicated shape like this, RMB, and you're done, it's very, very convenient. I would keep it on. By default, it's off, okay? Now, these two are gonna allow you to preserve right mouse button and alt key for navigational stuff. So if you need it, you can use it. Remember that, for example, when you draw in a cut and hold alt, you're gonna be changing, you know, the shape of the cutter, etc. So these options are gonna allow you to preserve alt and right mouse button for other navigational controls during cuts if you need them. I never really needed this to be on, but, you know, there you go. Then alt center, we already talked about this. It simply switches the draw point, right? So to center, right? So there you go. That's what it does. I'll keep it on. It's very useful. Then you have alt double extrude, the same thing. So when you hold alt, when you're extruding, you're gonna extrude both ways. Very useful, right? And alt scroll change shape, very useful. If you want to change shape between different shapes, you can. We discussed this already in the intro section, right? So you can change, you know, between different shapes very quickly. You don't actually have to go here and choose it. I prefer to go to the menu, but, you know. Then shift uniform. Well, if you're going to draw a cut and hold shift, you know, it's going to be uniform, meaning it's going to be a perfect shape, so like a perfect square, etc., right? So you want to keep it on just like the alt key. It's very, very useful. Then you have shift scroll to adjust circle vert. So remember, when you draw in a cutter, for a circle, you hold shift and you can scroll up and down to adjust the number of segments. And Boxcutter gonna remember that setting, so this is really, really cool, right? Then you got D for helper menu. This one here, I have no clue what it does, I'll be honest. I never used it before, and I haven't got the foggiest idea what it is. Anyway, display dots. That's important because, you know, you want dots to be displayed when you have dots on. So you can draw a shape with dots, which is really important, right? Then simplify, we talked about it. You can, you know, enable it, and you can use D key for a simplified D menu. I don't really use it. And also simple toolbar, you know, you can make it more complicated or less complicated. Simple toolbar is better. If you want to go crazy mode, you can, but I don't really think you should, because honestly, it's just way too many options, and you know, all of them you have under D menu, so why bother, right? But if you like top bar menus, go for it and enable it. Simple helper, the same, different menu. I really don't use it at all. I prefer the full D menu. I want to have access to all the options that are, I find useful. And D menu, the regular one, this one has all the really useful options. So, I think it's perfect. This one, grid mode color. So when you're running a grid, remember the grid option here, right? You can adjust the grid color to the type of the cutter you are using. So, and let's go with a static grid here, right? So now you see the color is going to be following. Let me just switch the cutter to let's say slice. If I hold control, boom, there you go, it's slice. So it's going to update, gimmick, but could be interesting, right? Wires only, that's for the cutter. So when you're gonna be cutting a mesh, right, you're gonna see only wires. It could be interesting, but honestly, I wanna see the shape. Also, it's easier to see the color and type of a cutter like this. But when your PC struggles, you might wanna turn it on. It's gonna save you a little bit of of VRAM, and then you can just enable other options or play with other options for wire fading, etc. Okay, and then you got the color of the wire for the shape of the boolean, and then you have the fading. So when a boolean fades, right, you have the fading options, and you can change them here. I just find that the default ones are fine. And then you got hard ups. We talked about it. You can assign a mat here for hard ups to use a mat through booleans. So when you're gonna be using hard ups booleans, right? So this one, you're gonna be able to assign a mat to the cutter to drop it on the on the boolean side of things. Yeah. So inside of this cube here, right? We talked about it in the Boxcutter section when we discussed the cutters. And that's basically it, and these options, as you can see, are far more useful than a lot of this, rubbish in hard ups, in my opinion, right? I find them way more useful, right, than the hard ups gimmicks, because they actually are very niche oriented, and you could define your workflow the way you want very specifically by simply adjusting these, right? You can obviously change the colors of cutters, and you can do all that under preferences. So if you go to preferences and you type Boxcutter, right, you can go to preferences for Boxcutter, and you can, just like in hard ops, you can change the color for the shapes. You can change the color, for the different cuts, etc., and widgets and whatnot, and display options, and you can play with all these settings if you want to. I never touch them in my life. And again, do not touch shortcuts, because you're gonna be in a world of pain unless you know really what you're doing, or you're using just one or two add-ons, right? But honestly, just trust me, learn the shortcuts and don't touch them, because it's way easier to learn new shortcuts and then think about how to set other add-ons and also shortcuts for Blender, because when you start stacking add-ons, it's gonna get complicated, okay? And it's also easier to migrate to a different Blender or work on another Blender, when you have standardized shortcuts, I'm just saying. Anyway, that's it for this section. Also, that's the last video for the course. It was a really long course. I know there was a lot of stuff in it, but you don't have to go through all of it. You can just go back to certain sections and rewatch them if you want to. But I'm confident that this should give you way more than you need in order to become really efficient using these add-ons. And if you went through the modeling section, you know how powerful they are, how quickly you can do stuff, and how much fun it is to design. Because, as artists, we like to just go with the flow and create. We don't want to be boggled down with all these, intricacies of menus, moving stuff, adding bevel segments, changing miters, adding auto smooth every freaking time we add a new object. Is just cumbersome. You want speed and sort of a flow to be able to deliver what our brain tells us to, in terms of creativity, right? You just want to go and get it done. And vanilla Blender is so slow and clunky that, it's just really irritating sometimes to work. And I actually get annoyed when I have to use all these slow tools. So when I found, hard ups and Boxcutter, and I ages ago when I saw the first videos by Master Z, and I was like, wow, I want this in my life, that I knew this is it, right? So anyway, hope you enjoyed the course. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm looking forward to seeing your creations using hard ups and Boxcutter. Don't forget that you can always join our Discord. We at the moment have close to 8,000 people, to a massive community, and it's very helpful. A lot of really cool guys, very experienced one as well. So join the community, and I hope you're gonna enjoy your 3D art. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.